Hey there.
Hey.
Good, we're connected. All right, this is new to me, so excellent. So, Frank, thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure, man.
All right, so first of all, my name is Christian. I work a lot with Rosso Automobili. I'm based in Miami. Frank, where are you based right now?
Right now, I mean, the closest city I'm next to is London, but I'm pretty much
Okay,
out in the countryside, so it's southeast England.
nice, very nice. Probably a nice place to be quarantined for a little while if you're
Oh,
still
if you
doing
saw
that.
my view, you'd probably understand. It's pretty nice. I don't
Awesome.
know. I mean, I don't know how the view could be better than what it is. So,
Wonderful. So for everybody starting to tune in, I don't know what you guys do and don't know about Frank, but quickly, some of his greatest hits, the BMW X5, BMW's first SUV, Maserati MC12, the mini hatch Fiat 500, McLaren P1, absolutely legendary hybrid supercar. And of course, today we're going to kind of focus on Ferrari, but the F430 and the FXX, some pretty heavy credits.
mm.
Um, at Rosso Automobili, we're really focused on the past, present, and future of Ferrari. So I want to kind of start with questions about car design theory. A car
Mhm.
is interesting in the sense that it's very designed, but it's very functional. I want to know a little bit about your philosophy as a designer, the relationship between form and function.
Um, I mean, you're starting off with a great question there. I have a real personal view on form and function. I got to tell you, Kristen, one of the pet peeves I have about the design profession is, especially when you're doing a product that has to work, is when they say that form follows function.
Right.
Now, it sounds cool, but it is the biggest load of manure that I've ever heard in my life. I just want to put it mildly, but
Okay.
truth is, if you design something that works great, it most often looks great. It's very hard to screw something up that works great because you need to follow great design principles to make something work great. Um, and a misconception is oftentimes that design is basically just the art of designing a car. In other words, your task or your job is to make a car look pretty or
Right.
attractive or desirable. That's far from the truth because design actually is a combination, I'd say, of the art and the science of making something look good. So you can make a pretty picture, obviously, and a lot of designers they're very good at rendering and they hit you with that 1-2 punch of something on paper that looks absolutely awesome. But truth is, you have to make something not only look good, but actually work well. There's no
Hmm.
value in a single dimension design. In other words, that it performs well and doesn't look good, or that it looks great and doesn't perform well. So what I'm trying to say is that for me, form does not follow function. Form equals or form is function. How do you do that? Well, design is subjective, or the aesthetics can be very subjective, and there's no right and wrong in terms of that kind of approach. There's good taste and there's bad taste, but who are we to judge somebody else's taste?
Sure.
What is a hard number, something you can attach a value to, is good design and bad design. And good design adheres to a few principles, the main one being obviously proportion. So if you see a car that is out of proportion, that just immediately turns you off. And it's a natural feeling. So there's things in nature. I do a lot of, all my design has always been based off what we call biomimicry, which is the law of using nature as an inspiration. And
Right.
in nature, they have a law for proportion in just about everything. It's very bizarre, very strange, but it's called the golden law of proportions,
Hmm.
and it adheres to a ratio which is 1.618. I'm not going to get into the technical side, but if you can make all your lines, all your shapes work to that proportion, then most often when you look at a car for the first time, or you fall in love with something, or it emotionally stimulates you, it's following pretty close that formula. And I've always adhered to this law. It feels like I'm cheating a little time, or a few times, or most of the time, or copying something. but it's a fact of nature that if you use this law of proportions, I mean, Da Vinci, it goes way back, you know, the architecture, and Greeks and Romans, everybody used this law. And we have these iconic designs that have turned out from that. So without getting too long in my response, I think the main thing for a designer is to hit the right proportions right away. But at the same time, you've got to give it a family identity, a family look. It's very important that you design something, and we often say you should be able to recognize the vehicle without the badge on it or the logo. That's very true, but it takes a few elements to make that happen. With Ferrari, it was extremely difficult because Ferrari doesn't have a typical front end, especially. You know, the front end of the car is what we call the face of the car. So it's very hard to get a unique face on a Ferrari. You know, you got sporty headlights or, you know, brake ducts, grill openings, things like that. But when you have a front engine Ferrari and a mid-engine Ferrari, it starts changing a little bit. But there's always been it's always been a challenge to design a front end, say, family feeling or character to a Ferrari. So that comes down to the designer's, a little bit of his taste or subjectiveness, I guess. But you still have to feed the engine, you have to cool the brakes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of practical consideration. I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like, you know, it's a real cross section of art and science, which kind of leads me to the question of how what's the workflow look like between, you know, engineering and design? You know, how does that? You know, obviously you have to work together, but is anybody leading that? Are you following each other? I mean, what's it look like?
Well, if each department had their wish, they'd lead the other departments.
Sure.
We need a judge. We need a judge somewhere in there who kind of rolls over both. And typically that's your CEO. Oftentimes the CEO is just going on his own gut feeling. You know, he didn't train to be a designer and he didn't train to be an engineer. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But at the same time, your engineers are engineers, designers are designers. But the rule of the game is oftentimes you learn it. It takes a bit of experience to get to a point where you develop a thick skin as a designer.
Yeah.
And you learn that the last thing you want to do is compromise your design. And the engineer obviously wants to not risk his career by not being able to do something well. So he typically, not typically, but oftentimes goes for the easier or the most cost-effective solution. So that can compromise the design quite a bit. But when you get a good rapport between the engineering and the designers, then, and that typically only happens, or most often happens in the high-end companies where there's a bit more of a budget that you can stretch and do things where the competition is so tough that you have to actually do things that puts engineering a bit uncomfortable in their position to deliver, because otherwise you're just going to get walked all over by some other brand that comes along with a way to do it. And then you're chasing the competition. You're not leading the competition.
Have you ever been in a position where you feel like you had to sacrifice design for performance, or even vice versa? Have you ever sacrificed performance in the name of design, or is it always the goal to maximize both?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, of course, on the segment of the car. You know, if you're going to design a bread and butter car, as we call it, you can sacrifice on the performance a little bit to get a design that probably hits 75% of the public in the sense of looking great, but it doesn't perform that well. But when you start climbing up the automotive performance ladder and you get up to the very top, performance is absolutely vital. And I mean, we're not talking top speed, because in most places around the world, most countries won't allow you to even get close to the limits of what we do today in terms of performance. But, you know, these things with how the car handles in terms of minimizing weight and increasing braking performance, or road handling in the sense of downforce and things like that, the performance becomes critical. And that's where the designer tunes more into the engineering requirements, I think, of the car. And all this, you know, I'm up to here now, you know, after a few years of designing these things, where designers typically complain that they've only been able to deliver this design as not so pretty because of the engineering requirements or certification or homologation requirements. They pay designers big bucks to deliver good design. There's no excuse not to deliver good design. In nature, where performance is critical, because if you don't catch something, you don't eat, or if you don't run fast enough, you don't get away from the enemy. You got to be absolutely designed to the, to the nth degree to survive. Nature is all about survival of the fittest, and nothing good in nature has ever lasted, not lasted very, very long. So what I'm trying to say is that there's very few things in nature that don't look beautiful, So if you can design something that works really, really well, as nature does in nature, you're going to end up hopefully with a beautiful product. So if you make it ugly, it's because you tried to make it ugly, or you couldn't make it, beautiful. It's there's no excuse for ugly cars.
That's a great quote, actually, and I happen to agree. I think even a cheap car you can make good looking.
Oh, absolutely.
So
it's actually more expensive to design an ugly car than it is to make a beautiful car, because the ugly car is not going to sell. So the company loses a lot more money. So make it beautiful and sell it.
So a lot of fans want to talk Ferrari, Maserati. Tell me, how did you get started with them? Did you approach them? They approach you? How did that start?
No, you don't get approached by the head of church, by the Pope, as I say. So
right.
They contact you. So yeah, it happened to me in a dreamlike sort of surreal way, I guess. And it happened at the right moment in my life too. I mean, it's kind of serendipity when things like that happen. You can't really plan your career about hoping to get hired by Ferrari and Maserati one day. It's right. You're either in the right place at the right time, or you're not. And it's got to happen to somebody. So I was very, very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. But what had happened was a lot of companies, I guess, had taken notice in me after the Mini had come out, when it was released onto the market, the Mini Cooper and Cooper S and things. And so people started, I mean, before that, I'd done a few other cars, but, the X5 Cosworth, and then the Mini, obviously. So I wasn't really, my name wasn't out there. If people dug in, they would have probably found a bit more, but those still are not, you're not really like a major league player if you're still only 2 cars into your career. You still have to be very consistent to get to that level, I guess. But yeah, when the Mini came out, I guess it was a kind of a grand slam, and some companies started wondering who's done it and that. So I got a few calls, but most of them, all of them I turned away, because I wasn't ready to go to Japan or the US or travel too far outside of Germany, because I'd settled into Germany. I was speaking German, and liked the work philosophy, and the BMW Mini as a brand was great. It had a big future to it. So I was pretty excited when I came back from England, from having done the Mini and having the future of the brand ahead of me. But as it turns out, you get these phone calls, and like I said, most of them were just uninteresting for me, tempting but uninteresting in a certain way. And then I got a phone call from a lady with a bit of an accent, and she said she was looking for a person to represent design, or have a responsible position in design with a great company. Would I be interested? And I said, of course I'd be interested, but who are you? And she said, well, we can't really tell you over the phone, but we'll send you a plane ticket, come down, visit us, we'll talk and see if you're the right candidate, and blah. So I said, okay. Yeah, well, it was only, it was only a day out of my life. And the letdown came when I saw that the plane ticket was to fly to Turin, Italy. So, if you know Turin, it's Fiat. It's like Maranello is Ferrari. So if you get a ticket to fly to Maranello, it's like bingo, jackpot. But this was the flight of Turin, and I thought, well, whoopee-doo, and I'm not really that excited, but who knows what the offer is. Maybe it's going to be CEO of Ferrari, first designer ever to represent a group or something. But anyways, I got there, I had lunch in a very small, hole-in-the-wall Italian restaurant, as they typically are when they're 5 stars. It was a really nice restaurant, but you'd walk right by it.
Yeah.
And so I had a lunch with the head of design of Fiat and the head of research and engineering. So those 2 main guys. And obviously I wasn't too thrilled, because I thought, well, if it's any design position, it's underneath the head of design, because he's interviewing me. Mm-hmm. And that's when the surprise came, because we talked design and my philosophy and all that during lunch. We got to dessert, and it was the funniest experience. I mean, at that moment it wasn't funny, but I can remember it now and say that this should be recorded in history as the moment something amazing happened. They said, I was having my tiramisu, which is a really nice Italian dessert, and they said, so yeah, okay, we think you're the right guy for this job. And I'm like, yeah. And they said, so if you're not going to take this position, just please don't spread it around, because we're not looking for many people. We've got a certain few people on our list, and we just want to get through them. But the offer is for you to be the head of design of Ferrari and Maserati. And that tiramisu went out horizontally at about, like a projectile. I just like, what? And I said, you got to be kidding me. There is no design director at Ferrari and Maserati, because if you know the brand, they've been using Pininfarina, and Maserati's been with Giugiaro for many, many years previously. And they said, yeah, well, that's exactly the problem, because Montezemolo lately is a little bit upset with the designs, and we don't really have anybody who can handle or can justify that position within our company. Basically, we take what Pininfarina gives us, and that's it. So we need somebody inside, on our side, to stand up for our requests and modifications and things. So what are you going to say? No, I don't want this position. Obviously, I had to say, yeah.
Sure.
But
I have a few people asking, about how to get into car design. You mentioned something interesting, which is right place, right time. I mean, you can't discount luck, but what are practical steps a young person is interested can take to get into the world of car design?
Well, to get into the world of car design, I mean, it is one of the hardest jobs currently, I would say, because first of all, car companies don't need a lot of designers, and the more designers you put into the mix, the more flavor the product has, the less flavor the product has. It's like everybody's throwing stuff in,
A horse designed by committee.
Absolutely, and the camel, And so, and the problem is that designers tend to be prima donnas. We're all sensitive guys with a bit of a flowery side to us, because we're sensitive to color, we're sensitive to shapes, and so that's kind of like I wouldn't say it's not a manly thing. You can be manly and still like these things, but it's kind of seen as a guy who gets upset very easily and and walks off. Sorry, I hope I didn't do that too good. So, anyways,
no, I work with designers every day in my day job. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so they get upset if their design doesn't get chosen. So you get some not bad apples, but frustrated apples when you're working with a big team of designers, and that brings the energy level down. So I have always preferred to work in a small team and try to get the energy going in a positive way. Although each designer thinks differently, which is what you want. You want them to sink in like different gears or different sizes of cam gears or whatever, and that gets momentum going. But what does a designer do? The problem with, like I said, joining into the automotive design industry at the moment is the amount of people who've come to see it as a dream profession. When you're very young, you're more exposed to it now than ever. I mean, in social media, you get so much available inspiration from great designers, really good young designers who are just struggling to get jobs. They're as talented as you can imagine. And they're all looking for, how do I get into the profession? So it's tough, mostly because there are so many of them now trying to get in the profession. A lot of schools teaching it, and there are very few jobs available. And the worst thing right now is the downturn of the industry, not just in design, but the whole industry in general. It's cutting back on development, it's cutting back on costs, it's cutting back on suppliers, and all that's reflecting back into how many new models are going to be coming out and how often you're going to renovate them. So or succeed them with a new model. So what happens is basically I can see the design teams reducing even from what they're at now. After this typical situation we got on right now, there's a lot of cost cutting going on, a lot of furloughs and things like that. So it's going to bounce into the industry, and I find it very, very sad, because the last part a company should actually cut back on is on design and engineering, obviously, but you need design before you need engineering, because if you don't have a great design, there's nothing to engineer. So, Einstein said that imagination and creativity is much more important than intelligence, and I really believe that, because without an idea, there's nothing to develop to make it. So how do they get in? I mean, persistence beats resistance, as they say. So keep knocking on the doors, even though, nobody's responding or whatever. I oftentimes don't respond simply because the typical thing, I don't have the time, I'm doing too many other things. But if I notice one guy's email just keeps coming in, and the guy's not mad at me and starting to, swear and say, you don't respond and all that, it's just still being nice and still saying, look, I know you're probably not able to respond for whatever reasons, but I am absolutely incredibly passionate about what I want to do in life. And I'm not going to stop sending you emails until you tell me to stop. So maybe one day you will respond to me. And that is just what I said, this obsession and passion for doing something. And it's not taking no for an answer, because if I said no, that's okay, then it's no. But if I'm not responding, which is probably what's happening a lot in the industry at the moment, keep trying. I'm sorry to say it's like that, but it really is. And my experience is the guys who keep banging on the door, I'll finally open it. And at the least, I'll check out his level of work and research him, go on to LinkedIn, go on to all the different social media channels where I can see what his portfolio looks like. Maybe I'm not even telling him that, but I'll check behind the scenes. And if it's good and it's something I find interesting, I'll definitely get back in contact with him. So again, how do I do it? Well, first of all, obviously you have to be very, very good at what you do. You can't be an average designer and expect to get a job. There are just too many good designers out there, young designers, hot designers coming out of universities now, that it's amazing. I mean, you guys are, it's shocking how good the young designers are nowadays. But one thing I would say to all of them right now, face to face, and if you're listening to me, is do not rely solely on computer, Photoshop, all that kind of stuff, concentrating too much on alias or 3D modeling. If you're going to be a designer, the absolute first thing a good design boss will look at is not at your renderings or anything like that, but at your rough sketches. The simplest way of transferring the idea from your brain to a piece of paper. It can have coffee spilled on it, which I often do, but it can be dirty sketches in the sense that they're not polished and rendered like that. That stuff is actually easy to do because you've got all these computer programs that allow you to do it. But what is basically the telltale sign of a great designer is his rough sketches. There's always a way to see if there's a talent within the rough sketching, but it's your mind speaking, not the computer speaking.
Yeah, I've seen you're a real proponent of pen and paper and modeling, and I even see, when they launched, I think these SF90, Flavio sitting there drawing, live. I mean, it's the primary indicator of talent and vision.
Absolutely. I remember that video. I had a friend of mine who was actually sitting next to Flavio when he was doing it, or right near him when they were finishing up. And he told me that was the most impressive thing he saw, a guy right there on the spot, able to draw under pressure. It's not really pressure. The guy is just basically, it's just like writing for him,
right.
Lettering or something. It's drawing a beautiful car. Flavio is one of the greats, his sketches. I've always admired his not only his sketches, but the way the sketches turn into 3D products. He's got a real feel for proportion, great looks, and stance.
So that's a great transition point to a question I want to ask. Ferrari design today, it's all in-house under Flavio and Flavio's team. Two questions there. Do you think creatively, as a creative process, that's the right move? And what do you think of Ferrari's design language today? Before we jump back to your days of Ferrari, where are they today, in your opinion?
Well, it was, I wouldn't say it's a risk, because when you put together a great team of designers, you're going to get a great result. The problem is, the thing is that you're probably going to get a different language than what you were using before, which is normal. I mean, not every designer thinks alike. You can get inspired from the past. You have the Ferrari look, the Ferrari genetics, the Ferrari DNA, and you don't want to toss the baby out with the bathwater, as they say, so you don't want to start from scratch. By bringing in a new team, obviously you run the risk of upsetting the language that's been built up over many, many generations. But Flavio is capable. I think he's been doing a great job. There are a couple of cars in the portfolio at the moment that don't sit well with my vision, but they've got enough bandwidth spread that they can manage some cars to look elegant, some cars to look aggressive. They can do cars that have lots of wings on them. They can do other cars that have very few lines on them, and they're still within that extreme, that bandwidth I mentioned about Ferrari. So it can still look like a Ferrari no matter which direction they go with. I think it's good. I mean, the thing, Pininfarina has been around for a long time. They've done awesome products. When I say Pininfarina, I mean the group, because obviously Pininfarina is not Pininfarina, Pininfarina or Sergio or whoever you want to speak about sitting down. It's now become a pretty big, hugely talented team, you know. So it's the designers, you know, if you look at Fioravanti or many individual designers at at Pininfarina have been able to make Ferraris look absolutely stunning. And what they've decided to do is branch away from that and create slowly. They didn't create it overnight. It took a generation, actually probably about 10 years to start looking at bringing in an in-house design team that would be responsible. So they didn't have a design studio. Now the Ferrari and Maranello has got an amazing design studio and very well structured and put together. And you know, it's still a dream place to work. I wouldn't say it's the place to work, the ultimate place to work, because for a car designer, those of you thinking the top of the top is Ferrari, it's great. Obviously, it's like you know, it's like playing, you know, pitching for the Yankees or something. I don't know, the Red Sox, whatever you want to say.
Where would the best place be?
The best place is for exactly what happened to me, but that happens very, very, very few and far between. The chances what I had, which was go to a company of the reputation of McLaren, who was only a race car company when I arrived, and have the opportunity as a designer to work from a clean sheet with no past design restrictions or obligations, and to work with a team of Formula One engineers to develop your road car. I mean, you know, start with a clean sheet. Don't worry about the car not having any family feeling, because we don't really have any cars except for the F1, obviously, but that was like your great grandpa, you know. And so, okay, the philosophy being, you know, absolutely uncompromised performance. Okay, that's a good thing to have in your head when you design a McLaren. But basically, I think the opportunity I had with McLaren was to start from a clean sheet and work with top-notch engineers to develop a car that was at the level of Ferrari, which had been building cars by then for about 60 years. And to do this with Ron Dennis's requirement that we do it within a space of 5 years, you know, develop not just one car, but as many cars that we could get in, which were a sports car, supercar, and a hypercar. That was a challenge and a half, or, you know, challenge twice over. So the pressure was on in a certain way, but we managed it. And McLaren's, you know, it hasn't reached the level of Ferrari in terms of worldwide recognition, probably, but in terms of performance and its own design language, I think that was pretty well developed. And, you know, it takes a while to develop a car such that the resale value stays high. But typically, McLaren owners will drive their cars to death and not just park them and stare at them.
Oh, I would say McLaren is in absolute equal company at this point with Ferrari, Lamborghini, Koenigsegg. I mean, it's up there. It's tier one, 100%.
It's amazing that they've used the same engine. Well, basically the same engine for so long. Now it's being tweaked, obviously, but they've been able to generate 3 different versions of the car, 3 different segments of the car with basically the same engine, you know, and alter the performance and power levels of it. So, yeah, it's held its ground. It's good.
All right, so Ferrari F430. You know, for those who are watching, you know, Frank did a long video on his YouTube channel. I don't want you to walk through every detail of the design story because it's all there. A couple little details people want to know about. The F430 logo embossed behind the mirror. That's an interesting little touch. Do you know where that came from? Do you remember?
Of course. Yeah. I wanted to. The engineers didn't. The engineers thought it was not a very good idea. They wanted 0. So I said, well, let's split it in half and just have 1. And let's put it on the driver's side. So it doesn't matter which steering wheel you have. Which steering wheel, which side it's on, if it's on left or right. We got it on the driver's side. So it's always on the driver's side, depending on which side the steering wheel's on. Yeah, it's one of those crazy stories. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, a guy with 1 eye. Why would you do that? He's got more character than a guy with 2 eyes. So
it's certainly remembered. I mean, people were asking about it. Somebody brought up the Manettino. You know, the 430 was one of the first cars to have that. What was your involvement in that design move, that concept?
Do you know the story?
I don't.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
I don't.
Yeah, well, I was the guy that did the Manettino, the first Manettino. and it was an amazing. I thought you were asking me because you know the story.
No, no, no. I'm genuinely
Ah,
interested.
yeah. So we had to put a Manettino. We didn't have to put it, but we thought if we could put the Manettino on the steering wheel, we'll finally justify that myth or that belief that Ferrari Formula One and Ferrari road cars were bonded,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So Ferrari road cars uses Formula One technology. That is not very true. And
Okay.
what proved it to me was when, the Feliza, Amedeo Feliza, who's the head of research and engineering, said, I want you to put a Manettino on the steering wheel. And I'm like, okay. So if I'm going to do that, I know it's what we have on Formula One, to set up the different modes and things. I'm just going to go over to the Formula One department across the street. So you have on one side of the street, you have automotive, and on the other side of the street, you have Formula One. And it's the same, it's just a street going between the two of them. But one side's Maranello and the other side's Fiorano, where you have the test track and all that.
Right.
I mean, you could spit and hit the other side of the street, and that's Ferrari Formula One. So that's how close it is. So I decided I was pretty fresh there. I went over to the Formula One side, walked in, and they said, "Do you have an appointment?" The secretary. I said, "No, I run the design from Ferrari cars." Yeah, well, what would you want? What do you want here? I'd like to just go over and pick up one of your little Manettinos from the race car, from the steering wheel, so that I can look at it, study it. And I know the drivers are wearing gloves, but at least I can get something that has the same influence from the Manettino that you have on the steering wheel. They told me to go take a hike.
Huh.
They refused to give it to me. And I'm like, why? I mean, I'm your brother from across the street.
Right. We're coworkers.
Yeah. I mean, at Ferrari, it's more like, And they said, no. You know what this piece costs? We can't just give it to you. You have to, go back and have the purchasing guy buy it from us. And I was like, come on, I just want to borrow for a few hours. I'm going to go back, have a few photographs made of it and shoot it from some different angles and use it for our new steering wheel. No. So basically, I had to go through this long, drawn-out process. And that showed me the relationship between Formula One and automotive. There wasn't that yeah, come on over and whatever you want kind of thing. You can't look around in Ferrari Formula One. You have to be, it's not like McLaren. I'm not shooting Ferrari down.
Sure, yeah.
But it's a complete different philosophy of working over there. And I'd expect it to be the opposite, actually. Mm-hmm. But no, it wasn't easy. But eventually I did get the Manettino, and I had it for 1 hour. I had to give it back in 60 minutes. So the Manettino, I worked on it very quickly and got some documentation and things. And then we put it on the steering wheel and a few tweaks and things, but it was important to make it very visible, obviously, and very easy to use ergonomically. It came out pretty good. It's one of the classic things and the iconic pieces that's evolved, I guess. But that starting point on the 430 was pretty cool.
So it still persists today. It's in every model.
Yeah.
My interpretation of Ferrari design is that a lot of we'll say parts of the vocabulary get established in those big anniversary cars. You see things from the Enzo that carry forward LaFerrari. So when you sat down to design the 430, I mean, were there cues from other cars that you felt like you had to use, or any ideas you felt like you wanted to carry through? Was anything directed to, or were you just given freedom to be influenced and be imaginative?
No, I mean, Ferrari, there's really nobody there to tell you have to do this, you have to do that. I mean, if anybody, was Montezemolo, but he didn't really feel like coming over and telling me what to do. He basically just said yes, no. And I had to either do it myself at my desk and take it to Pininfarina or send it over to Pininfarina and Turin, and that would be worked into the model that we were developing there. But there was really no theme that this car has to do this and look like that. The only basic theme was we're running it off the 360 platform, and all the mechanical components are going to be where they're at today. We're just going to beef up the performance a bit more horsepower and stuff. We're not going turbo with it, so don't worry about huge intakes. So all the intakes relatively are going to be exactly where they're at today, and we just need them to be a little bit bigger, and this is the size requirement when we're feeding more air in. So those things, you got to adhere to it, and then obviously you want the car with more power to stick more to the ground, so you work a little bit more on the diffuser area, front and back, and position of the intakes and things. But relatively, it just had to be a more modern looking 360. And for me, the 360 was a beautiful car, but if you look back at it now, it's still beautiful, but it's got the softness of it.
It's a bit soft, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which the F50 also had quite a bit. I mean, when from the F40 to whatever came after the F50, it was just the F50 was the stage where they just boom.
I'm not a fan of the F50, and I argue with people about this. I think it's a bizarre low point, very bulbous, very soft.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'll tell you what, the performance is incredible. You drive it, you forget about what it looks like. It was a very good performing car, but I think they just stuck it in the oven, clay oven, let it sit in there too long, and it kind of softened a little bit. And they took it out and thought, oh, it's about what it was when we stuck it in. So let's just go with that, It was actually pretty.
And I only ask is something like the tail lights on the 430 look a lot like the Enzo. I mean, was that on purpose, or do you just feel like there's some design cues I want to carry forward that make it Ferrari?
No, that was Ken Okuyama did the Enzo. Great Japanese designer that I went to university with. We graduated together, actually, Ken and I. And we had a great at Art Center. I don't want to get too far into that, but six of us graduated from a class of 30 students at Art Center, and Ken was one of them. And Ken went off, obviously, and did so many other great cars. We had Craig Durfee, who designed the first Dodge Viper, and we had Miguel Angel Galuzzi from Argentina, who did the first Ducati Monster, and we had Grant Larson, who did the first Porsche Boxster, and Andreas Zapatinas, who did the Fiat Barchetta. So that was our class of 6, basically. We went off and did different things, but pretty much in touch still. But getting back to the question, which was
just about the 430 tail lights.
Oh yeah.
Looking like the Enzo.
The Enzo had that.
Yeah.
And so obviously, when you have a hypercar or a supercar in your range, probably more like a hypercar today, the Enzo, you want the design traits of your, we can call it haute couture, your calling card of the company, to trickle down into your other products, so it brings that value, that high-end value or visual value into your product. So you don't want to replicate it because there's no thought process to that, but you want to sort of let the same language trickle down into your next car. So that was a bit of that, obviously.
Yeah.
On the FXX, I think you might have some pictures there if you look in your inbox. The original idea on the FXX was basically get rid of the 2 taillights on either side of the Enzo and stick the exhaust pipes, the 4 quad exhaust, basically 2 on either side, into where the taillights were at. That came out pretty well.
I'm glad you brought that car up, actually, because recently you shared some pictures of what your finished design versus the actual production FXX.
Yeah.
There were some differences. What specifically didn't make the cut?
Quite a few things if we start talking about detail, but I knew the car was going to be non-homologated, so you don't really need lights on it. So that's why I got rid of the taillights and put the exhaust in there. And also in the front, I thought the space that we had for the headlights, or the headlights or headlamps, that could be turned into a cooling duct. So I did, I think, a pretty nice shape for the area around the headlights. And in the end, they wanted to make sure that if the guy's driving the car at dusk or at night, people race cars at night on tracks too. So they wanted to have some minimal amount of light. So I had to redesign that and make it more normal, I guess. I mean, the headlights are pretty cool on it anyway. It's just a single.
Yeah, a little circle.
Yeah. But before that, if you look on the image, you'll see that it was actually a NACA duct. NACA is a term for it's used in aviation in terms of the best shape to take air in, certain volume, maximum volume of air. So the typical NACA duct starts small and expands, which creates a different air pressure and sucks air in at a higher velocity. So air can start to go in, but it will actually accelerate when it hits a type of shape like a NACA duct, which is what the headlights on that one that you have.
They're also functional. They cool the front.
Oh, absolutely.
Brakes.
Yeah. And a few other details, but also you can probably visually see the graphics really changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
I always thought the car should show off the carbon fiber and not be painted. Well, painted, obviously, the car's got to be red somewhere. Yeah. But I thought a lot of elements could be actually gloss black or actually clear lacquered over the carbon fiber, so the carbon fiber does stand out because it's a pretty element. Back then, actually, carbon fiber was new. You know, it was new. It was kind of fresh, and it looked pretty racy, I guess. And you know, when they started painting the white stripe on, we lost it a little bit. So,
So
the spoiler in the back was more aggressive, I think, on the original design intent.
it did look so, yeah. So I mean, you said you knew Ken. I mean, was it intimidating at all to take a finished car that was pretty much a masterpiece? And what was your assignment? Iterate on this? Did you talk to Ken at all? Were you intimidated by the assignment at all?
No, I mean, you'd only be intimidated if you think you couldn't do it. So, but not to say that I knew I could do it. I mean, by then I'd built up a bit of a confidence level where it wasn't intimidating. And you learn that, you know, at the end of the day, if you're a trained designer and you've done a few good, you know, feathers in your hat from previous jobs, somebody's got to do the job, you know, and not everybody gets it right all the time, 100% of the time. So all you can do is try your best, you know, and even safer is basically they were only going to make 19 of these. So you could design something that looks really terrible and you'll still sell 19 of them if it's got Ferrari on it, you know. So
before they're even finished.
yeah, well, 19 Ferraris.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you the real number, but 19 Ferraris were sold before it actually went into production. Sight unseen, which is amazing when people pay, you know, that much money, $2.5 million for it. So if you're going to pay $2.5 million, you don't know what you're going to get. That's a lot of trust, I guess. So, but pressure, I wouldn't say pressure. And I didn't speak with Ken simply because the free reign was there to sort of change body panels and do whatever was needed to make it a desirable non-homologated track car. So the freedom was there to sort of take that design language that Ken already established with the Enzo and do something a bit more extreme than that one already. So, but you're starting with a good recipe in the first place. You know, unless you throw something weird into the mix, you're not going to destroy the concoction or the soup.
Right, some good ingredients to start.
Yeah.
Did you have you ridden or driven an FXX?
Yeah, of course.
Well, you never know.
Well, that's the joy of Ferrari. I mean, we used to just leave our windows open at work just so we could hear. I mean, nobody played music. We just kept the windows open and listened to the test cars and the test track in Formula One. That's the kind of music we heard.
Yeah, I mean, I visited the factory in 2002, and I remember that you can't, as a visitor, you can't see Fiorano. You can hear it though.
Oh yeah, it's like going to the opera and sitting outside sitting outside or listening to the music from outside. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, you know, anytime you can hear an engine that spins at, I don't know, 14,000 RPMs or 15,000 RPMs, it's violent. I mean, if you ever get a chance to go to a Formula One race, in the old days, more so than today, obviously, but in the old days, man, that engine revving that high at that speed, I remember it used to be frightening in a way. You think something's going to go wrong, you know, and that is just a violent sound. When I was working at Ferrari, I didn't have a Ferrari, I had an Alfa. Nobody at Ferrari actually gets a Ferrari as a company car, not even the highest up boss, you know.
Really?
Yeah, there's no Ferraris on site. None of us. We all got really nice Alfas if we had a good enough position. But what I used to do a lot, because I used to travel all the time from Maranello or Modena for Maserati, all the time over to Turin, like 2 or 3 times a week. So I was going back and forth all the time. So that's your downtime when you can finally relax a little bit. It's about a 2-hour drive. But I used to do this trick just so I could make sure that I was relaxing, since I didn't have to think. And I had this CD that had recorded all the different sounds of Ferraris, Formula One engines and high-end, you know, V12 road cars and stuff. And they're just basically their tracks, you know. So you have track 1 is this V12 and track 2 is this one. And they're all basically just doing laps around Fiorano. So I'd stick that in my CD player on my Alfa. And whenever I heard the phone ring, I'd put the track on. And then somebody would hear me and say, "Am I catching you busy?" I'm like, "Yeah, hold on, I'm going to
let me take my helmet off."
They all think you guys doing a test drive or something, so it wouldn't bother me a little bit more.
You know, I watched a TEDx talk you did at Eaton a few years ago, and you said, you know, there's this Mandela quote that it always seems impossible until it's done. Did you recall any seemingly impossible moments when you were working with Ferrari that you overcame? Or was it a
Um,
pretty easy working relationship?
well, the impossible part was oftentimes getting things done, in the sense that the Italians basically are kind of, no, they're not kind of Latin, they are Latin. And you know, the famous word that, one of the most used words in the Latin language is mañana.
I
You know
live in
what?
Miami, so I understand.
It's
Yeah.
venlo. Habla
Oh, yeah.
español?
Un poquito.
Algo, no?
Yeah.
Okay, we got probably have a few Spanish listeners, but mañana is a bit more the Italian style as well. So anytime I would, you know, head over to Pininfarina or Giugiaro or Ital Design or ask for something, it was always a little bit of a delay. So it was as
Yeah.
if we didn't have to respect the timing schedules, because we
Yeah.
can do it. Just don't bug us right now. We're busy with our
It's
espressos.
not the most organized place I've ever been.
No, we had, I mean, I can tell you funny stuff. Like when I was in Germany and we had our meetings at BMW, or BMW and Mini, and those meetings, whenever it was on German soil and a meeting was supposed to start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody's sitting there at 5 to 3 just waiting for the meeting to kick off. And it was a half an hour meeting. Bang, 3:30, everybody gets up and leaves. That was it.
Wow.
Got to Italy, 3 o'clock, I'm sitting there. There's nobody there. 3:15, still nobody's there. 3:30, I realized that everybody forgot about it or just didn't care, and there's no meeting going to happen. And then you remind somebody, says, "Oh yeah, we'll have it next week. Don't worry."
That's
So it was a
hilarious.
complete different working style. It was so relaxed. That might be the secret of Ferrari, that they're not. I mean, obviously there's pressure, because pressure in the sense of delivering high quality work. You're not messing around with failure at Ferrari, so you got
Yeah.
to get it right. But there's a different work atmosphere. Work environment is enjoy life and work. It's not work and then enjoy life. It's basically enjoy yourself at work. So so
Hmm.
that promotes a good working environment, and people are generally smiling at Ferrari. It's not because of the salaries; they don't pay that much at Ferrari,
Uh,
but
I never forget, we toured the factory. I never saw more people smiling,
hmm,
and they weren't putting on a show for people touring the factory. It was genuinely, they're happy. They're happy to be working in that family of
yeah, I
Ferrari. I
think
mean, it's,
it's pride too.
yeah,
You got a
a lot
pride
of
and a
pride.
passion for it. And there's a big car culture, obviously, in Maranello, Modena, Bologna. That area there is, they call it Motor Valley.
Yeah.
Uh, it's kind of like Motor City, Detroit, but this is Motown. But this is Motor Valley, because you get this stretch from way over almost up to the east coast of
Hmm.
Italy, along that edge, where you get a lot of motorcycle, MotoGP companies working out of there, all the way over to Turin. And you got
Hmm.
that stretch there. You got Dallara and Parma, and you got Pagani, Lamborghini, obviously Ferrari, Maserati, Fiat. All that whole stretch there is just covered with a lot of suppliers and
Yeah.
high-end suppliers and everything. So it's kind of great place to, if you're a car freak, or live for cars kind of guy. That is the one
Yeah.
place in the world where you have to, pay your respects, kind of.
It's church. I mean, I dragged my wife to Pagani a few years ago, and
Uh,
my favorite part was Horatio pulling up to his factory in his Ferrari F12 TDF. Wasn't even driving his own car.
it was
I
his
love
car, huh?
it. It
Yeah,
was his, yeah,
amazing.
his
Yeah,
very
there's no jealousy. I mean,
market research.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's all the companies pretty much get along. You have to, because otherwise you'd be throwing bombs at each other. It'd be kind of like dangerous to live close to the other guys. But it's a good environment. I think
Yeah,
people are generally friendly. You go out, obviously you go out in Modena, or Modena as you might call it, and you meet people from other companies working. You go to a restaurant, there'll be a guy from Lamborghini sitting across from you, or another guy from Pagani, whatever. So it's
yeah,
real intense car culture there.
yeah. To touch on McLaren just for a moment, we have maybe another 10 minutes here.
Mhm.
How did the McLaren icon become such a persistent design theme? That's an interesting quirk that I always notice. Is
You
that
mean the swoosh,
the
the
swoosh? Yeah, yeah,
upside down
exactly.
Nike?
Yeah.
Uh, Depends on who you ask. I can first tell you that, well, there are a couple of interpretations of where that swoosh came from. So the general explanation is that it is a stylized kiwi. So if you look at a Kiwi, which is from Australia, New Zealand, sorry,
Right.
and you stylize the Kiwi, which is where Bruce McLaren was from originally, that basically is the futuristic stylized version of the logo. So, and that in itself, obviously people say it's the upside down Nike logo or the swoosh, but it's not. It just, if you flip it, you can see some similarities. But the idea of that, and you know, it actually comes from a chevron. Basically, McLaren and Marlboro have a history together from way back, and the chevron was McLaren's, the logo they used with McLaren back in their sponsorship days. And so there was a stylized version. That's the story I got from Ron, was a stylized version of the Marlboro cigarette company or tobacco company logo. But what's more interesting for our viewers today is the story of the Ferrari logo. And I'm sure all of you probably think you know it, but I'd love to tell you guys if you've got a second.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's pretty amazing. Guys, get your computers out and Google what I'm going to tell you, and you'll finally, as you go along, realize something that you probably never knew or thought you knew before. So obviously the story, when I arrived at Maranello at Ferrari in 2002, July 2002 is when I started. The second week I was there, I was invited to have a business lunch or a meet and greet lunch with Piero Ferrari. Now, Piero Ferrari was Enzo Ferrari's son. He was the second son of Enzo Ferrari. He was what we call the illegitimate son, because his mother was not the mother of Dino Ferrari. Right. Dino was Enzo's first son. Passed away at the age. Yeah, when he was 26, and he had multiple sclerosis, and not nice. But he was a great kid, obviously, in that. But Piero was so a lot of Italian men have friends that live close by. So Enzo had a friend, a lady friend in the hills in Castelvetro, which is a small town up above the hills in Maranello, and he used to visit her a few times. And Piero came out of that relationship. Her name is Lardi. Her last name was Lardi. So Piero grew up being called Piero Lardi. That was his name. He was not allowed to use the last name of his father, Ferrari, until Enzo actually passed away. So as soon as Enzo passed away, then Piero became Piero Ferrari. And he looks, if you look up Piero Ferrari, you'll see that he actually looks like Enzo's double, almost, in certain, maybe not as heavy as his father, but the eyes and the expressions, all there. One of the nicest men you can meet. He's probably in his about 70s now, and he's on the executive board of Ferrari, but absolutely a legend. Anyways, 2 weeks into my Ferrari start, he invited me to lunch and wanted to explain to me a lot about the not the rules, but the feelings that they had at Ferrari and the values and things. So he took me across the street from Ferrari to the Cavallino restaurant, which is right in front. And I thought, okay, we're going to have a meal downstairs, but you know, Piero Ferrari is like the Pope. So you don't just eat with the common people. You go up, took me upstairs to a private dining room that his father always used to have or go to at lunchtime if he didn't go to the Fiorano test track. So we went upstairs to the restaurant. There's a small room up there, and we had an amazing meal, obviously, pasta. And then at around the dessert time, he asked me if I had missed anything. Do you want me to cover anything that you might have a question about? And I said, well, this might not be too relevant or necessary to know, but I've heard a story about the Ferrari logo with the Cavallino, the horse and things. And can you tell me a little bit more about that? And he says, okay, I tell you the story that everybody knows, and then I tell you the story that we never tell anybody. So I thought, whoa, this is going to be interesting. So he basically told me that there was a family. So there was an Italian World War I fighter pilot called Baracca.
Okay. And
Baracca was like the Red Baron of the Italian Air Force in World War I. Very, very good fighter pilot. Anyways, he got shot down and killed at some point during World War I. But obviously his parents, who were Italian aristocrats, kept the logo off of his airplane, off the tail of his airplane. And they knew Enzo when Enzo was still at Alfa Romeo before he started Ferrari. And so they told him, when you start your car company, Enzo, use our son's logo off the back of his airplane, and that will bring you good luck. So obviously the horse came from Baracca, the fighter pilot, and Enzo started using it right when he started his first Ferraris. He used the color Modena, which was yellow for the background, and that. But the horse was straight off of Baracca's airplane. So that's as far as most people know the story. If you dig deeper, which I don't know if people can actually dig deeper, but this came from Piero Ferrari himself. So it came from the horse's mouth. He said, the question that everybody misses is, where did Baracca actually get the horse for his plane in the first place? I was like, He says, okay, so Baracca was flying in a formation with about 9, 10 other of his colleagues or pilots on a mission around the Austro-German-Italian border, somewhere around there. And they came across another flight, what do you call them, squadron of German fighter planes coming straight at them. So obviously they all spread out, they get into dogfights, and they start shooting each other down. And Baracca shoots down a German pilot. And in those days, when you shoot down a German pilot or an enemy pilot, if you want to get the credit for it, and the promotion and the, and the money and everything you get with killing other pilots, enemy pilots, you gotta actually have a witness that sees it and confirms it. But nobody saw him do it. So in those days, if you didn't have a witness, the only way you can actually prove it is to land your aircraft, cut off the enemy aircraft's logo, roll it up, take it back to base, show it, and you get the kill. So he did that. And what he did was, when he saw the logo that he shot down, he decided to keep it for himself. So the logo came from this German pilot's plane that he shot down, right? So now the story gets really interesting. The German pilot that he shot down was from Stuttgart. Stuttgarten, if you translate it, roughly means stud guard. So it's like horse farm, stud farm, right? The Stuttgart is known in the old days as being a place where they had big passion for horses and stud farms and things. So if you research now on Google, what is the logo of the city of Stuttgart? It is the original Ferrari horse, right?
Oh, yeah, somebody in the comments here mentioned Porsche.
Well, I'm not finished yet, but I'll get there. So anyways, the logo of the city of Stuttgart is the horse, right? Okay. And this was the horse that Enzo started using because it came straight off Baracca's airplane. He didn't realize it, but because nobody told him that, so he started using it. As soon as he found out that Porsche had exactly that horse in the middle of their badge. So if you look at a Porsche badge, Google it, you'll see the original Ferrari horse right in the middle of the Porsche badge. So as soon as Enzo started realizing that, damn it, we've ripped off the Germans in a bad way.
Oh, I see.
We're going to have to do something, but we can't really get rid of the horse. So what Enzo started to do was every 5-10 years, he'd rock the horse a little bit further back. So the horse over generations has got now to the point where the top, the ear is at top dead center. If you know cars, that's 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And the hoof is at bottom dead center. So there's a perfect north-south relationship between the ear and the hoof. And that basically has been stylized slightly over the years to become less Porsche-like, but that's it. What Enzo never did, and this is what Piero told me, really, really surprised me, was Enzo never changed the orientation of the tail of the horse, such that if you're a horse connoisseur and you look at the Ferrari Cavallino today, the position of the tail, because he never moved it, means that the horse is actually flipping over on its back. It's a cantilever motion when the horse goes back. It's got to move the tail for cantilever, balance. Yeah, but you never moved the tail, so that horse is actually going over on its back. You can't have a horse go in that position with the tail where it's at. So
that's funny. What a cool little insight. I love it.
Yeah, it's one of the good ones. There are a few other good stories like that. But
on a personal level, I want to know if you could only keep one of the cars you designed, not as a daily driver, but just to have, what would it be and why?
A Ferrari?
Any car really that you've designed. I'm sure it's like picking your favorite kid, but
yeah, it is. Yeah, which one do you want to go to the game with, or which one do you want to go on a hike with, or something? It is tough. I mean, it obviously definitely depends on the situation and where you're at, what you're doing. But I mean, for me, the ultimate car to have is an awesome SUV, because the SUV, you know, which Ferrari's getting into now, obviously, is the car that basically you can go to the opera with, you can take the kids to school, you can go to the countryside, you can do you can storm across Europe in a GT style, you know, but you're in a command driving position, so you're having a good viewing angle and you feel safe and all that, and you can throw everything in there. So a high performance GT styled SUV, I guess you could say, that would be optimal. And there are a few cars that are vehicles that answer that. But if it had to be a car itself, I'm as passionate about Ferrari as the next person. It's just that I think that having been able to develop the 720S from scratch, in other words, well, from scratch, carbon tub, obviously, and a engine that we had to sort of adhere to, with a great suspension, obviously, and gearbox and things. But I think from a style and performance view, I think the 720 pretty much does it for me. And I hate cars that, I mean, it's nice that you have a hard top to it, electric, you know, roof and that, but the car doesn't make sense to me when you remove the hood, or sorry, the roof.
Right. So you're not a fan of soft tops?
Never have been. I don't think cars should go without a roof. I just think, you know, it ruins the line. It's kind of like removing a part of your body, you know, to be lighter. It doesn't even make it lighter to remove the roof, but it does make the car slightly heavier. But it's not so much that. I just think it ruins. We put so much effort into designing a car that flows, you know, especially with a Ferrari or McLaren. The lines have to go somewhere. You suddenly have it abruptly disappear.
Was the 430 the last Ferrari with a soft top convertible? I think the 458 became a hard top.
The 458.
I'm inclined to agree, because the 430 hard top has such a flow. The lines are really. It's not the same in the Spider. It's not the same.
No. It's the same. I mean, people know that I absolutely go weak at the knees for a Jaguar E-Type Series 1. But that car without a roof, just, you know, I wouldn't even look twice at it. It loses. It's like cutting somebody's head off and saying, do you still like that person? No. You know, nice body, but it's a shame that the head's not there, kind of approach. So a Jaguar E-Type, which for me is one of the most gorgeous cars ever, without a roof just doesn't make sense for me. So
one last question for you. You said that design is about making things desirable. What would be one everyday object that, if you had the chance to redesign it to make it more desirable, is there anything you use in your daily life you just think, I would love to make this better? Or is it everything you touch in your daily life?
I try to keep everything I use in my daily life as practical and perfect. I mean, I go nowhere without this. It might be a little bit bizarre, but it's like, you know, when MasterCard says don't leave, or Visa says don't leave home without it, or whatever one of those credit card companies say. I can't go if I don't have this in my hand or on me somewhere. I become a babbling idiot kind of thing. I just can't function without this. It's like designers use these to speak with. You know, drawing is worth 1,000 words, or pictures worth 1,000 words. So I kind of communicate clearly like that. But and I can't even redesign that, because it costs very little, but it works so great. You know, it's absolutely perfect in its function. So to redesign something that I use in my personal life, I'm just looking around. I'm big into shoes, and I'd kind of like to design a shoe. I mean, I love driving, obviously. But if I could have a shoe that works as a driving shoe, but still is elegant enough to go into a formal event, maybe, and still relaxed enough to wear, you know, casually. So maybe it's a shoe. I've always loved shoes and shoe design. Maybe one day I'll get into it. But I just think that shoes are too purposeful at the moment. In other words, it's nice that they're purposeful, because I don't like, you know, things to be designed such that they do multiple functions and they're not really very good at any of the functions. But if I could design a shoe that basically does every function it has to do, great or very well, then that would probably be the ultimate thing I could design. No, it's not the ultimate. I mean, obviously there are many other things, but chairs, furniture, you know, very interesting furniture that adapts to what you need it to do. So if you're in, you know, you're working right now, I've got a nice chair here, but if I had to basically say, okay, I got to take a nap for 5 minutes or 20-minute power nap, the chair would adapt to let me to actually catch those 20 minutes in a comfortable position. Yeah, and if I felt like standing up for a second, maybe, you know, we don't want to stand up and work too often, but at least maybe the chair would go up with me and become sort of like a bar stool or something. I don't know any chair that actually does that, but people, I'm noticing that now in this period of confinement, that we can call it, that basically I'm sitting around in the studio all day long and just get up for lunch or run out with the dogs for a second, but I need to be able to move more often, and a chair will often limit the time you can, if you get into what you're doing, which hard for creative people to stop when they get going, you still want to move. So maybe a chair that can adapt to a lot of different positions.
Sounds interesting. Frank, I want to thank you for your time today very much. For everyone watching, go to Frank's YouTube channel, subscribe. Frank Stephenson Design. He's got a lot of great How I Designed It videos, more to come. Follow Frank on Instagram, and you know, you're obviously following Rosso Automobili, but follow me too, Driven by Design, DRVN by Design. And thank you so much for your time.
And thanks. I'm following all the comments below. I've got a lot of friends that I see have joined in. I know
I do see them.
You're the girl. I know you. Bossy woman is fantastic. I have to mention her. She's great. She's famous. She's an actress. She knows it.
Oh, wow.
And anyways, yeah, there's a lot of comments, and guys, I wish I could answer all of you. I just wish the comments stay up in some way. Maybe they'll record this or save it live.
We're gonna save this. We're gonna put it on YouTube, reshare it. Absolutely.
Oh, that's good. So
very valuable.
Yeah, anybody want to send me a message? Feel free. I just feel very bad that I can't answer your messages live here, but I'll make an intent if you guys. Either put a return address or something on there. I'll try to get in on the important questions. I can maybe respond.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Frank, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Luck, and we'll talk again sometime, I hope.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.